Good. I'll call our meeting to order. So good morning and welcome to the February 2019 meeting of the New York City Campaign Finance Board. My notes indicate I'm supposed to wish everybody a happy Valentine's Day. I'm sort of a bah humbug guy myself, but if you celebrate Valentine's Day, happy Valentine's Day. So the first item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from January 17, 2019. I will move the approval of those minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Appears to be unanimous, so that is done. So the next item on our agenda is the chair's report. So let me launch right into it. We are less than 2 weeks away from a special election for the office of public advocate. On Tuesday, February 26th, New Yorkers will head to the polls to vote in this important citywide election. The board is conducting all of its regular election cycle responsibilities, including the administration of public matching funds, public disclosure of campaign spending and fundraising, coordinating candidate debates, and distributing a nonpartisan online voter guide, including candidate profiles. And I really pause from my notes for a minute. I want to thank every member of the staff of the Campaign Finance Board for the work that you are doing in this regard. I know that you're working under a lot of pressure. This is not an election we had anticipated, and you are working under two different sets of rules, only one of which is reflected on our computer systems. So I know that this is a challenging assignment, and I thank you for your efforts, all of you, in this regard. Last week, the board issued a second round of public funds payments to candidates participating in the matching funds program. Including funds distributed last month, the board has provided a total of $4,099,072 in public funds to 7 candidates on the special election ballot. This is the first election cycle in which the enhanced $8 to $1 matching funds ratio is available to qualifying candidates. Those participating in the matching funds program may choose between the new program and the old program, which provides a $6 to $1 match, albeit with different contribution limits. Each of the special election candidates who have been paid matching funds to date have chosen to participate under the new program. I will now turn to our Voter Assistance Advisory Committee Chair, Naomi Zauderer, for her report.
Thank you, Chair Schaefer. The board's voter assistance initiatives are now in full swing for the February 26th Public Advocate Special Election. A nonpartisan voter guide is now available online at voting.nyc, including video statements from each of the candidates who submitted a profile. The video voter guide shows started airing this week on the nyc.gov channel. It will air again today, in fact, starting at 4 p.m. For channel information, go to nyc.gov/channels. I encourage all voters to take advantage of these resources in the lead up to Election Day to learn about each of the candidates competing for their support. New voters and those who have had a change of address have until this Saturday, February 16th, to deliver their voter registration form to the Board of Elections. There is an office in each of the 5 boroughs, and you can find registration forms at voting.nyc or at your nearest public library. As the board chair mentioned, we're also looking forward to another compelling debate coming up on February 20th, when the leading contenders will face off at the Borough of Manhattan Community College. The debate will air on New York One or on NYC Life. The first debate, held on February 6th, featured 10 of the candidates on the ballot, and it was a spirited, informative exchange about the issues. If you missed the chance to watch live, you can always go back to watch the archive by visiting nyccfb.info/debates. With that, I will turn to our Executive Director, Amy Loprest, for her report.
Thank you. I, too, echo the chair's statements about thanking the staff who are working very hard to implement this new system in a very short time frame, both for the special election and for the 2021 election, which had its first disclosure statement on second disclosure statement on January 15th, the first one under the new system. I also would like to mention that next Wednesday, the same day as the debate, February 20th, the chair and I will be testifying at the Charter Revision Commission's hearing on election issues, one of which will be a discussion of campaign finance. Finally, I want to congratulate Ken O'Brien, who unfortunately is not here, but he is our Director of Systems Administration and has been celebrated this month his 30th anniversary with the board. So for those who know, the program is 30 years old in February of last year. So he has been with the board for almost the beginning and has seen an incredible change from, a mainframe computer system to a network system to people filing on paper by hand, to filing through diskettes, through filing online, an incredible vast change of computer systems over the course of that 30 years. And so I would like to congratulate him on his long-term service to the board.
Thank you. So we have one matter for decision today involving a special election and a campaign, and so we'll ask the attorney for the CFB and representatives from the candidates' campaign to come forward to the table. For the benefit of the campaign representatives, let me just briefly state our procedure. The attorney from the CFB will very briefly sort of outline the issue, and then it will be your opportunity to speak. We've all read background. Some back and forth, some questions from members of the board. So, Ms. Persky, would you like to launch into it?
Yes, good morning. My name is Bethany Persky, Deputy General Counsel for the CFB. With me is Auditor Jennifer Balance. Before the board is the matter of the Don Simmons campaign in the 2017 special election for City Council District 9. Ms. Simmons was a participant in the program but did not receive public funds. CFB staff is recommending that the board assess penalties for the following violations: submission of false or fictitious information, and failing to demonstrate compliance with intermediary reporting and documentation requirements. Staff is also recommending that the board find the campaign in breach of certification and therefore ineligible to receive public funds. The campaign contests one of the alleged violations as well as the recommended breach finding.
I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to stay with you just for a minute. I don't usually start off by questioning the board's counsel, but as I look at the charge of submission of false or fictitious information, there are really two different theories, or at least two different citations. One is to a provision of the statute that speaks to intentional or knowing furnishing of false or fictitious evidence, etc. And then the other citation is to a rule of the board which uses a should have known rather than intentional knowing standard. As I read the submissions from the CFB and the back and forth, it seems to me, but I don't want to mischaracterize your position, but it seems to me that the central theory of the case, if you will, from the staff's perspective, is a should have known theory rather than the knowing and intentional. Am I reading that fairly, or are you still proposing both as alternative theories?
I would say that our position is that if the campaign did not know, it certainly should have known, and that they certainly are present in alternate theories. I mean, we can't be certain as to what the candidate of the treasurer knew, since we aren't inside their heads, but we do think it's conceivable that they were aware. If not, based on the documentation, they should have been aware.
Okay, and you understandably view, correctly, view the should have known standard, obviously, as a easier standard to satisfy.
Yes.
Okay, that's their opening. The floor is yours. Please introduce both of you, even if only one of you is going to speak.
Yes. Good morning, Rachel Harding, representing the campaign. And with me today is the treasurer, Robert Fiore.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Chair Schaefer, Executive Director Loprest, members of the board, thank you today for allowing us the opportunity to speak. And besides Valentine's Day, more importantly, it's finally spring training. Pitchers and catchers have reported. So that's, that's more important than Valentine's Day.
Well, yeah, I agree.
We'll
I happen to
stipulate.
agree with that, and I'm really glad you pointed that out.
As Ms. Persky mentioned, what's at issue here today is about whether or not the campaign should have known what they were submitting was false or fictitious documentation. We are not objecting to the intermediary violation. To give you some brief background, I know you've all read the report. This was a small operation. It raised a little over $20,000. There were over 10 candidates in the race. As previously mentioned, it was a special election on Valentine's Day 2 years ago. And with the campaign, there are really only 3 people involved who could be constituted as part of the campaign: the candidate herself, the treasurer, who's with me today, and the campaign manager, Robert Morgan. The board has affidavits from all 3 of these individuals already. Now, the allegations in front of the campaign are very serious, and there has been a lot of back and forth, as the board has already mentioned. The campaign has also admitted that upon further review and discussion and looking at what the CFB presented to the campaign, that there were contributions which were bad, which were, whether fraudulent, fictitious, however you want to describe it, they were bad and they should not have been presented to the campaign. But the important thing is the knowledge. The campaign did not have knowledge, did not have intent, nor should they have had knowledge regarding all the facts in front of them. Question is, would a reasonable person in the campaign shoes, mainly Mr. Fiore, who's here with me today, who's the one who was inputting, who was the one who was reviewing, who was the one who was scanning, who was complying with all CFB rules, should they have known the contributions were fraudulent? And we strongly believe the answer to that is no. Again, special election, you only have 6 weeks. This election has a little bit more, but the one at hand only has 6 weeks. And the CFB responded by saying the campaign knew that ahead of time, which they did. But as far as the standard and the time for a campaign and a treasurer to review these contributions is a lot less than if you have weeks, months, years to review these. Although it's truncated, the standard cannot be held to a regular election. It has to be held to a special election. Also, this was a first-time candidate, first-time treasurer. If the campaign, the treasurer had been in the system before, They should they have caught it? I think the argument would have been stronger on the CFB side, yes. But they were doing the best they could, which was in front of them. Also, the CFB states in their report that there were no common characteristics of the alleged fraudulent contributions. There was the date was not the same. Some of the handwriting wasn't the same. The employer wasn't the same. So if the characteristics were not common, how should have someone known that they were fraudulent? The campaign admittingly misinterpreted at that point a recent local law that about 10 days before the campaign started was enacted, which said in sum and substance that the contribution cards do not have to be filled out by the contributor, so long as it's not tampered with or changed after the contributor signs it. Now, the local law does mention, admittingly, that someone on the campaign is the one that fills it out, not your regular person or not an intermediary. This was a misunderstanding on the behalf of the campaign. They're not attorneys. The local law was new. There wasn't guidance really set forth. They thought they read it properly. They didn't. So if the handwriting was different on the contribution card, it didn't raise a red flag like maybe it used to. If the ink color was different, it didn't necessarily raise a red flag. Were some of these contributions sloppy? Yes, but sloppy contributions does not mean fraudulent contributions. Also, these contributions did not come from the campaign directly. They did not come from the treasurer or the candidate soliciting the money. They did not come from a campaign-sponsored fundraiser. They came from, we believe, an intermediary whose boss had dealings with other members of the political party, although this was nonpartisan. So the campaign believed the money came in from a trustworthy source, a source that had provided other campaigns in the past, allegedly, contributions to fulfill the match.
I'm going to interrupt you here because it goes to sort of the heart of one of the issues that concerns me. I take it you're referring to Dr. Talaj at this point.
That is correct.
And the record is a little sparse, so maybe you can help us out a little bit and tell us who Dr. Talaj is and what, if any, connection he had to the campaign. And I mean any connection, any communication whatsoever.
So as far as communication to the campaign, he didn't have any direct communication. As I understand it, the campaign manager, Mr. Robert Morgan, who you have an affidavit from in your documents, is very familiar with another political consultant who had no dealings with this campaign, but they found themselves in a bind. So he asked this person, can you ask any of your regular donors, regular intermediaries, if they wouldn't mind helping us out in this district, in CD9, which is in Harlem. That consultant, it's my understanding, said, I might have someone, let me give the doctor a call, and then after that conversation, and I don't know beyond that conversation, I don't know when that conversation happened, and it was probably a back and forth. I'm truncating it. All I know is from that point until the time that Mr. Morgan received a call from the doctor's office, not the doctor himself, from the doctor's office, to come and pick up the contributions.
Do you know who that call was from?
It was from, hold on. I believe it was the office manager, whose name I think is Stephanie, and I believe her name is in his affidavit as well, as far as who he went to pick up the contributions from.
Because there are two other names that appear in this connection. One is Duluc and one is Magia.
Stephanie, unless I'm mispronouncing her name, that's Duluc. That's the one I'm referring to. Yes.
And Magia is another person also connected with Dr. Talaj.
Correct, and she's the one that they initially had the intermediary form for, and she's the one who. That's why the campaign believe that these contributions were good, because on the face of it, it seemed like they knew what they were doing. That office who was providing the campaign contributions, which were matchable.
Okay, so someone receives a call saying we've got some contributions. You can come pick them up. They pick them up, and this is the first batch. Was this the only batch of contributions, or just the first? Just the first. My understanding is I believe there were two in total. Two batches. And this first batch, is that the batch that is accounted for in Magia's intermediary statement? I believe so, yes. Because it's dated early. I think her statement was dated January 17th. Yes. So that sounds like it's early, because some of the contribution cards are dated later. Correct. Okay.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I just want to clarify, because I believe only one of these contributions was reported as having been intermediated at all. That reported intermediary was Magia, but I don't believe that these contributions were listed on the intermediary statement provided for her.
Well, when you say this, you mean the ones that
ones that were
turned out to have
denied.
been bad. I
Correct.
understand that.
Okay.
I'm just trying to get the overall picture now without regard to what was good and what was bad. I just
Understood.
want to understand who these people were, what their role was, what the interaction was. Okay, so you get a call, somebody goes and picks up the first batch, you actually get an intermediary statement with it. So except for one that later was denied, so far so good. Okay, what happens next?
Well, as far as that goes, what happens next is on February 9th, which was a snowstorm, the campaign receives the notice of denial of public funds, along with their second statement review, and they don't know why. Overwhelming of.
Let me interrupt you because
Yeah.
I'm going to let you get back there in just a second. But when you say that's what happens next, stay with Dr. Talaj for a minute. When did the second bundle, if you will, of
Right.
checks appear?
I don't know the.
I don't
I-
remember the dates.
I don't know the answer to
Did
that.
bef-
All
but
I
was
can
it
say is in
before
between the
this
disclosure
snowstorm?
statement 2. Yes.
Yes, because it was
during
before
disclosure statement
it was
2.
before disclosure statement 2.
Yep.
You get, I'm making this up, but you get a call saying we got some more
Right.
checks for you. Somebody goes and picks them up.
Yep.
There's another batch of checks. And was that second batch of checks that you picked up accompanied by an intermediary statement?
It was not, no.
Because your papers referred to an intermediary statement, which you never filed, by Dr. Talaj himself, I think. So I'm wondering, when did that document come into play?
There was never an intermediary statement filed by Dr. Talaj.
I understand it was never filed,
Right.
but your papers indicated that it was filled out and that at some point, at first you say it was not filed because of an oversight, and then I think your argument is it was not filed because you had doubts as to whether it was complete or accurate. But at some point you got a document that was an intermediary statement, and I'm asking when you got that.
Right, but I believe that was then inaccurate on the campaign's part. That my understanding is there was never a filled out intermediary form or any form provided by the doctor himself that the campaign, whether myself, the treasurer, the campaign manager, received.
Well, that's troubling. I mean, the campaign submits a response that says there's a form and it was filled out, but we didn't submit it, and we didn't submit it for these reasons. And now you're telling us, no, that's not right. There never was a form. Do you want to address that inconsistency?
Yeah, I mean, as far as it was never the intention or belief that the doctor was the one doing the intermediary. It could have just been improperly stated because I think, and I'm not quite sure the wording, I can go back and look, but if memory serves me correctly, it was just about the office managers, the workers, not the doctor himself. If it was, in fact, the doctor himself, that was never presented to us. So if that was in the response that it was the doctor, then it was a mistake and it should have been.
Okay, so fair enough. I'm not focused on the question of whether it was filled out by the doctor or signed by the doctor or by somebody else. What I'm focusing in is that your campaign, and I'm trying to find the document because I don't know whether it was a communication from you or from Mr. Fiore or from Mr. Morgan, but in the course of the audit, you submitted a letter, which I read last night, which said there was such a document, but we didn't submit it. We didn't submit it first because it was an oversight, and then secondly, because we weren't sure. Who said that, and on the basis of what information did they say that, in light of the fact that you're now telling us it isn't true?
Well, I'm saying it's not true in the sense of it's the doctor himself as to if it's a I would have to go back through the report. Based on the responses, it would have come from me, from my understanding of conversations with the campaign. I would have to go through the report and see if refresh my recollection.
Do you have a document, an intermediary form, regardless of whether it was fully filled out, partially filled out, signed by Dr. Talaj, signed by somebody else? Do you have such a document in your files?
I know we definitely, which the CFB already has, the intermediary form initially filled out from the doctor's office. I would have to, again, go back in my file, whether here or the office, to see if I have the document you're referring to.
The form that we don't have, which was not submitted by the campaign, is the one that's referenced in Mr. Morgan's affidavit, which says, I obtained an intermediary statement from Dr. Talaj's assistant for several of the donations. However, it would appear that not all the donations received by me as a representative of the campaign from Dr. Talaj's office were properly listed on said intermediary forms. That's on page 32 of Exhibit 1 to the board memo.
And in that affidavit, is it your understanding he's not referring to the major intermediary form, he's referring to some other intermediary
Correct.
form?
And I believe the campaign stated that that was obtained through Ms. DeLuke. So it's a separate form from the one.
Do you have that document?
No, we never received it.
Do you have that document?
I don't know. It doesn't appear that I have the document on me right now. That doesn't mean I don't have the document. I just don't have it.
Do you recall whether you have it or not?
I recall the correspondence with Mr. Morgan, and I recall him getting an intermediary form. What I don't recall if it was the Stephanie Dulac intermediary form or if it was in supplement of the one that we already submitted to the campaign already submitted to the CFB previously.
Well, I'd like you, when we're finished today, to go look for that in your office and please send it in.
Yep.
Because I understand that you're now not contesting the penalty for failure to submit an intermediary form, but that form and the failure to submit it is certainly relevant to the question of whether the campaign either knew or should have known that some of these cards were fictitious, particularly since it appears to be your theory that the fictitious, let's just call them bad cards, came from Dr. Talaj. And so it would be interesting to see whether the form that you may have, whether, even though it wasn't submitted, whether it matches up or doesn't match up to the bad contributions.
Understand.
Okay. I interrupted you at some length. If you can find your place in your outline to get back to, I invite you.
I think it was about baseball again. But.
Yeah, well, you've already done that part, so skip ahead on your notes to the part where I interrupted you.
Not a problem. And we will. I will contact Mr. Morgan and also look at the files for that and make sure to hand that to the CFB immediately upon return.
Thank you.
The campaign understands that cash is difficult. Cash for campaigns is evil in a sense. It's very difficult to track, and we understand why the CFB scrutinizes as much as it does. But just like it's difficult to track, it's difficult for a campaign to realize whether or not it's fraudulent enough. Unlike a money order where some campaigns were found in breach for should have knowing or knowing that it was fraudulent, there are consecutive numbers in money orders. There's signatures in money orders and in checks. So you can compare those signatures to those on the contribution cards. There's no comparing in cash. The cash that was presented in the campaign, the ones in question, I believe, were all $10 cash contributions. So when they were presented in a bundle to the campaign, all cash matched up. There wasn't a $20 bill. There wasn't a $100 bill. It all seemed to flow in the normal course of business, and cash is a common form of contributions, especially in this race and in District 9 as well. The campaign, throughout its 6 weeks and then afterwards, was compliant with the CFB. They tried their hardest. They were in contact with the CFB, with the liaison, with the auditor during the 6-week campaign. I'm not talking about what happened February 13th when the campaign found out about the alleged fraudulent contributions, but during the crux of the campaign. There's email correspondence that the CFB has. There are phone logs that I know the CFB has, the board has in front of them. They were asking at every turn, what can we do to get the matching funds? Can we submit affirmation statements before? What's the problem with this code? How do we get the matching fund from this? How do we delete transactions? They were always on top of the CFB and never withheld information. And I think, and with the report in front of you, but for the intermediary violation, I think it speaks bounds that there's no other violations in front of the board. Now, the CFB says being compliant is not a mitigating factor, but if you go back, and I pulled many, including some from 20 years ago, other campaigns that were found in breach of certification had a slew of violations, and a lot of them were miscommunication, late filings, issues with the books, with the accounting, improper expenditures. There was none of this with the campaign. They tried and they asked questions. They did what the CFB always asks them to do. The concerning thing that the campaign has with this is they feel almost a sense of entrapment, like the I got you. As we talked already, the first disclosure statement, after it was submitted, upon reviewing the CFB's evidence of their call logs when they started contacting these contributors to find out if the contributions were valid enough, it happened almost immediately after the disclosure statement and well before the disclosure statement number 2. And not once was the campaign given the benefit of the doubt. I'm not saying the CFB should, release all of their findings to a campaign during the campaign and saying, we believe there's fraud. Here's all our evidence, now go and try to stop it or create more fraud. What I'm saying is this campaign should have been shown the benefit of the doubt based off of their performance, and they were not. Not once did the campaign receive a correspondence from the CFB saying, there's something off with the handwriting, right? We're flagging this because these two items don't match up. The campaign never received an indication that the contributions they were submitting were bad, and they came even after the first disclosure statement. So you can't say the CFB didn't know once the second disclosure statement hit, because they already knew, and there's evidence in front of you showing they knew. There was no sense of communication on behalf of the CFB. Then flash forward to February 9th when the campaign received their denial fund payment, and we started reviewing the invalid matching codes. Overwhelming of them had the OTH1, which is other one. And when you go on the CFB's guidance, it says contact your auditor and find out why. Because upon quick glance, while again the contributions look sloppy, they didn't look fraudulent given all the facts above. Again, there was a snowstorm, so I believe more than half, I wasn't even at work, I believe more than half of the CFB staff was not here. So that's when I got involved in the campaign. I sent an email to the auditor asking her to call me immediately Friday when she gets into work. I sent a follow-up email about 2:30, getting a little nervous. What's going on? The campaign was very sure they got their matching funds. I got a call later that evening, and the response trying to go down, asking about the OTH1. What does that mean? The response was, you need to submit affirmation statements, but I didn't know what kind of affirmation statements. That's a very broad statement. And I asked her, what do you mean by that? Until finally, and I'm not sure if it was just on email or on phone, I kind of brought in Miss Persky because I knew her from previous campaigns, and we were able to set up a phone call with Mr. Schaefer on Monday morning. And it wasn't until
the other
then.
Mr. Schaefer.
Yeah, sorry. I apologize.
No, we've got the same name.
I don't know why I never realized that before.
No relation.
We spoke Monday morning, February 13th, which was the day before the election. And it wasn't until that point, and I believe the other Mr. Schaefer and Ms. Persky could tell you that I kind of had the shock factor. I went in asking, what gives? Why is the campaign this way? I had a full argument, and then they explained to me what their findings are. And I think my voice kind of changed a little bit, showing that, the campaign just had no idea about any of this, and they tried. The CFB prides itself, and I'm a firm believer in the system of helping campaigns, especially new campaigns. That's the purpose, and I feel like this campaign was never given the benefit of the doubt. They were waiting for the "I gotcha" moment, and unfortunately that came, but it did not come because they should have known. They were misled. They were lied to by a third party, which is unfortunate. And the campaign has asked on numerous occasions for over a year now for guidance with the CFB as to what to do now. And I'm not talking about the violations in front of us today. I'm talking even before the real notice of violations came to the CFB or came to the campaign. The campaign realized this isn't just about matching. If we unmatch it, it's not going to go away. That's not, they realized the extent of the allegations. But what do we do with these contributions? It's bad money. We don't want the money in the campaign. We can't refund it to the contributors because these people allegedly didn't give the money, so why are we giving them money that they didn't give us in the first place? Do we give it to the city? Do we give it to the state? Who do we give it to? And to this day, we've never received a response. We've been trying to work with. So
you're still sitting on some of those
yes,
contributions?
We're sitting on, the campaign still has money in the bank for the sole purpose of we want to give the bad money, the bad contributions to whomever. We just know they shouldn't be given to the people who allegedly contributed. And one last point, which speaks to that, and that's why for the doctor's office, we firmly believe it. The addresses match up. It's not like the campaign made up these individuals and signed contribution cards. And you can see in the CFB's contact logs, didn't seem like they had much of an issue contacting these individuals because the information was correct. These people weren't necessarily prime voters where the campaign went to get a voter log and could look at, their enrollment and get the addresses from that way. There's other campaigns that have been fined in breach for providing, false phone numbers because they're just putting in random numbers when they're doing fraudulent activity. This wasn't the case in there. And the campaign would not have known, even if they scrubbed and they looked at these people, it would have matched up. So to say they should have known with all this evidence, although it's a lower standard than, the intent, did they know? The campaign firmly believes that in their situation, they should not have known and did not know that these contributions were fictitious in what they were submitting to the CFB. And further, and I know I said one last point, I apologize. The CFB.
You get to say that as many times as you like.
Great. My family would like it. The CFB, in their trainings, and rightly so, always says err on the side of matching because you can never go back and match, but you can always unmatch. So the campaign knew if they did not get these contributions in timely by the disclosure statement, and there were only 2 before the special election, that if they did not get them in, they could not go back and unmatch the contribution. I think that's something that needs to be really thought about because, yes, the campaign would have loved to scrub these contributions. Yes, they would have loved to, if they thought the handwriting was a little bit different, to contact the contributor and have that time. But they didn't. They had to get these contributions in because the goal was for the matching, and they knew if they did not get the contributions in, they would not get the match. So what's the point of any of this? Again, I thank everyone for their time. I'd like to especially thank Ms. Persky for her time and professionalism throughout the process. You have quite the contact log between us, and she's been very helpful throughout the process.
Great. One quick question before we go back to Ms. Persky. What's the amount in that bank account that you're sort of holding back on? Order of magnitude.
$1,200.
Okay. Ms. Persky, some things you'd like to respond to?
Yes, just a few. So first, I want to note that the statement that there were not necessarily one unifying common characteristic among all of the cards does not go to the fact that within certain groups of the cards there were common characteristics. There was, for example, one group of, I believe, 16 cards, all of which were around the same date for the same amount, $10 cash contributions, where the handwriting is the same across all of the cards. And it's very clear. It's very conspicuous. Well, in some cases within the card itself,
Right.
the handwriting is not always consistent, but across the different cards it is consistent, which is sort of two separate red flags, because it will appear that someone filled out the card, somebody else signed it, but then the same person was filling out 10, 15 cards. And the same person was also, somebody else was also signing them. So some of the cards, again, on their face, it's not that the fact that there was not one unifying characteristic among all of them does not mean that certain groups of cards did not share common characteristics. This is addressed in the memo as well, but just regarding the campaign's understanding of...
Let me ask you a question about that. This is just because I don't know the answer. If somebody, not this case, just a new situation, somebody wants to make a contribution, I'm getting the contribution, I'm a campaign worker, and I give someone a card, and they say, could you fill out the card for me with the information? I'll give it to you. My hand hurts, so for whatever reason.
Sure.
And so the campaign worker fills out the card, and then the contributor signs her name, legitimate. Is that okay?
That is fine. As long as the person who filled out the card is closely affiliated with the campaign. And that actually brings me to the next point, which is about this local law, which was amended recently to provide that someone other than the contributor may fill out the card as long as the contributor signs it and as long as the card is not amended after the contributor has signed it by anyone other than the contributor. This brings us back to the fact that it's not really the cards that are the issue here. It's the denials. If someone had filled out 100% of these cards who was not the contributor, and the contributors had signed them, and we had these cards with handwriting that all looked the same, and we called the reported contributors, and they affirmed their contributions, or if we hadn't gotten as many denials as we had gotten, we would not be pursuing this violation. This is about the cards.
No, I understand that, but forgive me for interrupting again. I seem to be in an interrupting mood today. The campaign has conceded that there were bad contributions, so the falsity of the contributions is not in dispute. The issue is one of whether they should have known. And the theory of should have known is based upon the cards. So the cards remain a central element in this case, even though they themselves aren't the evidence of the falsity. So stay with this question of what it was about the varying signatures, common handwriting and other parts of the card that they should have seen, as your staff saw, as a red flag requiring follow-up.
So if we wanted, we can go through some of the exhibits, which are groups of some of copies of some of the cards.
That would be helpful.
Okay. So beginning with Exhibit 11 to the board memo.
Bear in mind, we may not have all the exhibits, but let me get this up on my screen and see if we have it.
I think these should work.
Exhibit 11?
Yeah.
Okay, I got it. At least if it'll load, I've got it. Just a sec. File or directory not found.
You can, I'll re-sign in for you. It's you have to.
So
How
Mr.
often do you
Schaefer is
have
going to bring
sign
up
in on this
the.
thing?
Yeah,
This
we-
keeps happening to me.
yeah.
All right. All right, I got it.
So this is a card from. These are two cards. One is from Jasper Jackson. One.
Okay, I've got it here. It's okay. Jasper Jackson?
I'm sorry, it was the top one. I had scrolled down. Sorry,
You
to
had
make sure
scrolled
to make sure it was
Okay,
complete.
got it.
Okay. Okay. So that's. I think that's 12. Exhibit 12 is the one that you have. That's Evelyn Martinez.
This is 11. Jasper Jackson.
Okay.
is
So
number
Jasper
11.
Jackson and Tim Rahman. These are ones where you can see it's the same handwriting for the name and address information. The amount appears to be different, and then the signatures and date appear to be some. Although the date on Rahman's card is the same as the handwriting for the name and address, not necessarily the signature, but then on Jackson's card, the date is in different handwriting and the amounts are in different handwriting for each of them. Exhibit 12 is...
So just stay with those two for a minute. So what's suspicious about these is that you would think if one person was filling it out for the person who's signing, that the whole card would be in the same handwriting.
Exactly.
Whereas one has a feeling if the amount is in a different handwriting, that somebody else filled in the amount.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not necessarily saying these are good or bad arguments. I'm just trying to make sure I understand them. Okay, keep going.
Exhibit 12 is the Evelyn Martinez and Rosanna Paulino cards.
Wait a sec.
That's the one that Mr. Schaefer gave you earlier, the other Mr. Schaefer. And so the Paulino card appears to all be in the same handwriting as far as I can tell, although the date may be different. The Martinez card is mostly in the same handwriting as the Paulino card, except for the amount and the date appear to be different, and possibly even in a different pen there. The cards are the handwriting is the same as each other, but within one of the cards, that handwriting is different.
Let's just, again,
I have one
hypothetical question.
Sure.
Let's say somebody is bundling contributions and is helping people with the cards, and it's legitimate, the person's connected to the campaign, and forgets to fill in the date, say, and they bring it back to the office, and somebody notices, oh, they forgot to fill in the date, and fills in the date. Is that a violation?
It's not per se a violation. It is not what the law allows for the filling out of contribution cards. It's not supposed to be amended by anyone other than the contributor after it's been signed.
Okay.
So the most conspicuous example, I think, and these are the 16 that I mentioned earlier, and I have a copy.
Thanks. You got you don't have an extra one.
which one
huh?
is-
Sorry, I just have the three.
Yeah, why don't we switch
I
places?
believe this is made up of cards that are mostly or all in the exhibits, but it's just joined together as one group.
Okay.
And these are 16 cards, almost all one day, all $10 cash contributions, and they all appear pretty conspicuously to be in the same handwriting across, which calls into question, first, why the campaign wouldn't have seen that there was a problem, and perhaps more pressingly, why none of these were reported as intermediated. If they had the form at some point, whether we still don't know where that form is or why it was never provided before. We did request it in the penalty notice. We said, you've told us you have this form, you may be able to, mitigate this penalty if you provide it. We still haven't seen it or confirmed that it exists. If they had the form, if they knew, even if you look at these cards and say, this is the same handwriting, I guess one person must have solicited them all and filled out the cards and then given them to the contributor to sign, which is perfectly legal. Why would you not report them as intermediated? Why would you not give us the intermediary form?
Well, that certainly goes to, and they have conceded the violation of the intermediary reports. Okay. And these 16 include some that have been denied.
All of the cards that were provided have been denied. Okay. And in fact, of the suspect cards, every contributor that we were able to contact denied their contribution. The only affirmations that we received came from contributions that were outside of the group of these suspect cards, because we contacted all cash contributors, not just the ones with bad cards.
I see. And the bad contributions, did they come in both before the first disclosure report and before the second disclosure report? Are they, or was it just before the first disclosure report? Because I know the campaign, Ms. Harding made reference to the fact that some of them seem to have been in the first disclosure report. Was that all of them, or only some of them, or some in the second disclosure report?
I'm just looking at so Exhibit 4 to the board memo is the contact log, which has all of the contact dates. And it looks like you're asking of the denials. So we had at least one verbal denial on January 24th and a written denial follow-up on the 2nd. And then We had another denial on February 13th. So it looks like
that's
it
the
spans
date of the denial. I'm
yeah,
just
you're
asking
the cards. I'm
whether
sorry,
whether the
contribution.
contributions that were denied spanned both the first and second disclosure reports, or were only part of the first disclosure.
I believe these are all from the first one. Jesse, is that?
They're almost all from the first.
Almost all or all?
I have to check.
But okay.
Well, they never got.
I guess that's good enough. Okay. All right. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay. So just a couple of more points to respond to. The first is that, when we conduct all of our investigations, there's a standard procedure by which we are gathering information before we contact the campaign. I think for obvious reasons, we want to know that there's anything to actually proceed upon, but also we don't want to potentially compromise the investigation by giving the campaign a heads up that it's happening. So we gave them all the information that we could once the investigation was complete. We were able to tell them, we gave them a list of the contributors who had affirmed their contributions so that they didn't waste time trying to track them down and get redundant affirmation statements from them. We gave them what we could when we could, but at the time, and the campaign has pointed out, this was a truncated time period. A special election is a very condensed period of time. We were working under time constraints as well. And so we did the best that we could in that regard. We did inform the campaign that they could disgorge the contributions. I believe the first mention of that is in the February 27th, 2017 contact record, which is Exhibit 10 to the board memo, that I did instruct Ms. Harding that they may be able to mitigate the damage by disgorging the contributions. And she said they would be willing to do that, but needed to figure out which ones may be fraudulent in order to do so. So that was always presented as an option.
But in light of that, they've done what they could at this point, since they don't know who to return this money to.
Right, but you could disgorge to the city. A refund certainly doesn't make sense because we're saying that the actual contributor is not who was reported as the contributor,
Okay.
But disgorgement to the city fund is an alternative option available for that.
Fair enough. But on the other hand, they didn't go and spend the money on their campaign.
Correct, but in terms of not knowing what to do with it, that was the option that was presented to the campaign.
I got it.
And finally, just sort of a slight detour from the knew or should have known standard, I just want to speak to the broader accountability that we demand of candidates and treasurers. We can't open up the program to a situation where any candidate or treasurer could claim no knowledge of a situation like this, of a scheme that really goes to the heart of the program, submission of fraudulent documentation and taking advantage of the matching funds in this manner. The candidate and the treasurer sign on to be held accountable. They have to be held accountable.
So in your view, God forbid I ever became the treasurer of anybody's campaign. In my current position, I couldn't, but I now know enough that I would never do it. But before I knew enough to have said no, I become the treasurer of somebody's campaign. And these contribution cards start to come in. Is it my responsibility, do you think, before, I guess I'm the one who signs off on the disclosure report, before I sign off on that disclosure report, should I have looked at every contribution card to make sure that it was filled out, that it was signed, and that there are no red flags on it?
I would say before you submit any document to a government agency, you'll be well advised to peruse it.
Yeah, I thought that was the answer. I just wanted to be sure. Okay. Ms. Harding, would you like to reply to any of this?
Yeah, so I guess just on that point, and Mr. Fiore can speak to it as well. He did look through the contribution. They understand that, as Ms. Persky just says, you should look at it even before, I would say, scanning it into CSmart, let alone submitting it. And that's exactly what he did. And in your mind, for a new treasurer, you check off the boxes, right? Is the committee name on it? Check. Is cash checked? Yes. Do I have the transaction ID? Is it filled out, right? And we've already conceded that there was a misunderstanding as to the local law. So the fact that the handwriting was different versus the signature wasn't a red flag. At that point, because of it, he now knows better. But also the signatures, which I think is most important, the signatures don't match up too. Had the signatures matched up in this batch that was presented, that would be very troublesome.
If the signature had all been the same.
Correct, or same. And if you look at this, they're very different. So again, for someone on its face, right? Just like petitions, they're deemed valid on their face. Everything was checked off. And were they sloppy? Yes, but sloppy does not mean fraudulent. And because there was no suspect of fraudulent contributions for the reasons I already stated, there was no reason to think that they shouldn't be at least put in the system to claim for the match and wait for the CFB to assist them in telling them what is wrong.
One of the things that concerns me is that in Exhibit 13, there are 2 cards for Jorge Toribio, and they have the same address. Handwriting is different. The signature is different. In one case, the occupation is bartender, in the other, it's student. But I would think that should have been a red flag.
Mr. Fiore said that he, again, from memory, because it was a while ago, believes that it could have potentially been a father-son. They see that a lot. Sometimes people don't put junior or senior, so that's not necessarily always a red flag.
That reminds me of one other discrepancy that was noted in the papers, but I didn't find it when I was looking for it. There was a reference to a whiteout.
Yes, there were. I'm not sure how many cards there were, but there were a few cards that had whiteout or altered information on them.
And what information was altered? Do you remember?
Sorry, when I went with Celine, the senior auditor at the time, when we got to the apartment, we did sit down on a table and the whiteout was very present. And when we looked through the documentation, the contribution cards did have whiteout on it, and that's why we took it. But I do not recall exactly where in which the whiteout was located, but I did see it with my own 2 eyes.
But the ones with the whiteout are not among the exhibits that we have?
That's correct. We limited the exhibits to cards that were associated with denials that we received.
Oh, because the whiteouts were not associated with denials?
No, I don't know if those were affirmed or we just didn't hear back from those individuals, but none of them were associated with denials.
Okay. Well, since we've asked them to supplement the record with a document, could we get to see the cards with whiteouts?
Sure.
All right.
I just have a quick question for the auditor, if I may. When you were there and you said you and Celine were working on it, was it ever raised to the campaign? Like, was it or was it in front of you? You said you saw it with your own 2 eyes. Did you ask Mr. Fiore, who I assume was the only one there, what's with the whiteout? Was it presented to the campaign?
Hi, Mr. Fiore was not by himself. He was with another young lady. I do not know her name at the present moment.
Okay.
Regarding the whiteout that we saw, this is something that we visually make a note of when we go to see campaigns. We always make a physical note, mental note of everything that we see, and it will be brought up at a later date. We do not look forward to discussing these matters right there and there with the campaign because we're trying to complete the compliance visit procedure.
Let me say something in reference to that, because I understand your point, but I don't think it's one of your strongest ones. As you've noted, the CFB tries and has a practice and history of being helpful. On the other hand, when faced with a potential fraud, obviously a different set of procedures kick in. And so, they're at a very early stage trying to figure out whether these discrepancies amount to fraud or not. It places a real muzzle on them as to how much they can share and how much they can say at an early point in the investigation, and I'm sure you understand that. I understand it puts you in a somewhat difficult position, and nobody is questioning your good faith, but it puts you in the position of being shocked when you finally learn that there's a fraud investigation going on. I don't think I assume both sides are in utter and complete good faith in that respect, and having listened to the back and forth on it, and I appreciate why you wanted to say it, I don't think that's sort of the primary issue here. Anything else that you'd like to add? Any other questions from members of the board? Well, thank you. This has been very helpful. You know, ordinarily we go into deliberations, but since we've asked for some additional documentation, I think we have to view this as kind of adjourned.
I do have one question.
Yeah, please.
Mr. Fiore, has he served on worked on other campaigns in the capacity of treasurer?
He's never been a treasurer on another campaign, if that's what you're asking.
Is that,
I mean, if you want, yes, if you would want to wait to get those before you deliberated.
So I think the two outstanding sets of documents are the contribution cards with whiteout on them and the potential intermediary statement from Dr. Talaj.
But by the way, I offer you the opportunity, if you wish to take advantage of it, that if there are other cards, whether or not they turned out to be denials, if there are other cards that you think are sort of egregious examples of red flags, please feel free to submit them, and of course give copies to your adversaries. But yes, those are the two outstanding items.
So the cards, I think we should be able to get. I mean, we have them at the office. We could get them pretty quickly. As far as the intermediary statement, I'm honestly not sure why it should be dispositive whether or not the campaign has it at this time. We've asked them for it previously. They've stated that they have it. Either way, again, these contributions were not contemporaneously or ever reported as having been intermediated by anyone, Dr. Talaj or anyone else, with the one exception of the Meggia one.
You know, I'll tell you what. Let's, since I sprung this on my colleagues in full view of this room, let me have a chance to, rather than just do it, let me have a chance to talk to them about whether we think we need to wait for these documents to render a decision. So we're going to go into the deliberations. The deliberations may result in one form of decision or another. We'll come back out after the deliberation. So thank you very much, and my apologies if I've confused anybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can somebody call Bethany? Joe came by himself. He didn't bring Bethany with him. Oh, there. Okay.
We're not having an executive session today.
I mean, we have to vote on the minutes. We thought if you had questions about the rules, but we can wait till next time for that.
Okay, I think we're all back and our court reporter is ready. Good. After some deliberation oh wait, where's, oh, there you are. Okay, you're here. And in light of the fact that it appears that nobody but me was interested in the document that I requested, we're going to not defer making a decision today. Speaking perhaps only for myself, if you had the document and wanted to send it to us, we'd be interested, at least I'd be interested in looking at it, but you're under no obligation to do so. We've deliberated, and I'm going to state our conclusions, but I want to preface them with the following. Our conclusions are based upon a finding that the campaign should have known that certain submissions were false, not on a finding that there was a knowing or intentional fraud. So I want that to be clear at the outset. Based upon our finding that the campaign should have known and therefore violated Rule 2-02, we conclude as follows. With respect to the alleged violation of submission of false or fictitious information, we find the alleged violation proved, and we will impose a penalty of $2,500. With respect to the alleged violation of failing to demonstrate compliance with intermediary reporting and documentation requirements, which the campaign has conceded, we find the violation and impose a penalty of $100. And with respect to the alleged breach of certification, we find that there wasn't a breach of the certification and no public funds will be paid. And so the total penalties are $2,600 and public funds will be withheld. That is our conclusion. That ends this matter. The last remaining business is for us to. Oh, yeah, we have one other piece of business. Yes, thank you.
But do you want to vote on that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I just announced it, and we didn't give anybody a chance to vote. So that is my motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, the motion carries. We have a further piece of business in that we have to ratify the public funds payments that have been made for the special election for public advocate. Do you want to spell those out for us?
Yes, with Chair Schaefer's approval, the following payments were made for the special election. I'm going to read. There were two payments, one on January 31st and one on February 8th. I'm going to just read the total for each candidate. They were announced in the press individually on the dates that they were made. Michael Blake, $740,491. Dawn Smalls, $616,474. Jamani Williams, $775,594. Rafael Espinal, $461,547. Ronald Kim, $537,789. Daniel O'Donnell, $491,151. Eric Ulrich, $476,026 for total payments of $4,099,072. The third and final payment is scheduled for next week. We're asking the board to ratify the approval of Chair Schaefer.
Okay, I will make the motion to ratify those payments. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries unanimously. And finally, I will move to go into executive session. We have some things to discuss, but nothing to vote on. And so my motion also includes a motion that following executive session, we will stand adjourned. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Former city council president, aren't you?
Oh my God, did I not read her name? Oh no, she didn't get back.